from the shores of beautiful Lake Coeur d'Alene in the heart of North Idaho. Local, regional, national, and international guests discuss their topics on our forum, the North Idaho College Public Forum. With your host and moderator, political scientist, Tony Stewart.
It is our pleasure to welcome you back to another week of our series titled Journey Through America's 20th Century. On each of these programs, we are hosting someone from history in most cases and someone who was very famous and affected America in some way. Today, we're very pleased to welcome to our program in this Journey Through Time and under our Chautauqua format, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who lived from 1882 to 1945. He was President of the United States after his election in 1932 from 1933 until his death in 1945. President Roosevelt was the only person ever elected to that office 4 times in this country. He also is so well known for his New Deal program that was a major surgery of the economy of this country following the 1929 crash and the Great Depression when he became president in 1933. He also led our country and the free world to victory in World War II. He's also often been talked about as the person who changed the Democratic Party into a major vehicle for liberal reform in this country. Prior to becoming president, he was governor of New York State. President Roosevelt, welcome to our program and this journey that we're having through time in this format. It is good for you to come from your time to our time in the year 2000 to speak to those issues that I've just identified.
It is wonderful to be here, and I'll answer any questions that you have on the table.
Thank you, Mr. President. I welcome to our panel as our regular panelist, Janelle Berg, who's an attorney in the state of Idaho, and next to her is Steve Shink, who is the Vice President of College Relations and Development at North Idaho College. And Janelle Berg, I present to you President Roosevelt.
President Roosevelt, can you tell us something about your pre-president years? Those are the years, I take it you were born into a family of some privilege, raised by an adoring mother, married your cousin, and then had an event that changed your life. Can you help us with some of those events that occurred in your life?
Well, that's correct. I am from Hyde Park, New York, about 75 miles up the Hudson River from New York City, and as such, I am an Empire Stater. I contracted polio in 1921. I was just vacationing off the coast of Campobello, Maine. It was a great day, and within about just a matter of hours, I was very, 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 very tired. I laid down. I was originally diagnosed with the common cold, turning out to be grotesquely incorrect. I was later correctly diagnosed after a series of days, 7 or 8, that I did in fact have infantile paralysis. I had lost the use of the majority of my body. I could not hold a pen, but eventually I did come back. However, the spinal column was a bit too damaged, and I have never regained the use of my legs. Now, many would contend that this has made me maybe more polite to the understanding of the common man. You say I was from a privileged family. Yes, I do. I am keeper of the magical name of Roosevelt. The great Theodore, my wonderful cousin, and the other great Roosevelts. And as such, I would say not so much my illness or my disability, or however it is pictured. I would say that my understanding as an individual comes from my fact that I am simply a Roosevelt, and that being a individual of understanding of people's needs, of a social responsibility, things that have been forever placed within me. I would say that my disability has not kept me from anything, and as such I did just 7 years later run for governor of New York, and then eventually right up into the presidency of our great United States.
Steve Shink.
Mr. President, your name is forever linked with 2 momentous events in 20th century American history, the Great Depression and World War II. Tell me, if you would please, a little bit about your view of the role you should play in trying to raise the country out of the Depression.
Yes. The Great Depression was a time of incredible despair. As you know, there are a number of different ways that the Great Depression could have been handled. President Hoover was not doing any of them. My idea was to tackle the situation as it was. It was a condition, it was not a theory. I thought that it should be handled with bold and direct experimentation. We should begin immediate plans, ways to get direct assistance to individuals, great federal programs, great public works. In almost every way, the country was ailing. I say that it was time to establish a simple safety net, just a way to catch the casualties of the free enterprise system, not to strangle it, but to look at the great garden that had been laid out in front of us by our founding fathers and to pluck from it those noxious weeds, those excesses, those things that had been polluting the proper democratic process. I say that with liberty and with freedom come other essentials, that being prosperity, that being happiness. I say if we are to be free, we should be prosperous. I say that if only a few of those moneyed or manufacturing interests are the only ones who experience prosperity, then we are not living in a true free or true liberated society. And I think that through the government, we should try to explain to the people that we have a wonderful system that is responsive to them. Better to have a government that the people can vote in or out than to have the cold indifference of greed rule over them. Better, as I would say, to err in charity than it is to suffer the crass ridiculousness of the economic royalists, as I would say.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Certainly.
Mr. President, with this progressive program you had, you were really asking the country to take a very different opposite course than with the New Deal and economic policy. You had resistance in the other two branches of government, of course, the Congress, and particularly resistance from the Supreme Court. In fact, you
That's right.
are quite famous for your attempt to pack the court so they would support your New Deal. Would you share with our viewers how, over time, you did succeed in bringing Congress? Well, you succeeded rather quickly with Congress, the famous 100 days.
That's right.
But you were in danger of the court striking down, which they did on some occasions. Would you share with us how, out of defeat, that you actually wound up with victory, as I would interpret it, with the court?
Yes, well, I did propose a court reform that would have added the number of justices, that would have established a mandatory retirement at the age of 70. Chief Justice Hughes, of course, found this to be quite alarming, and Congress agreed with him. But, yes, there were a number of justices, the steady four, as I called them, who forever voted together, and the way I felt, against me and against what I would consider progress. Was my idea that I was saving the court from the Constitution and the Constitution from the court, saving the court from itself. I was still able to pass a great deal of legislation. However, after my great first 100 days, the New Deal was starting to take shape in a much different form. Congress was becoming much more, how should I say, experienced. They were expecting different things from their president. But eventually we came to realize certain fundamentals, that of the branches of government, questioning where is the democratic will of the people. Maybe our founders would have focused that on the legislative branch, saying that the House of Representatives is where the people have their voice. That is what the will of the people is. Well, in my view, and eventually in Congress's view as well, they took great direction from me and from me as a president. I was always appealing to the people. I was very intimate with them. They were my great friends. I loved my American citizens, and as such, Congress respected this, and eventually we all did come to a very good understanding.
As you're visiting us now in 2000, and you can see what's happened since your presidency, as you brought about Social Security and the Tennessee Valley Authority and Bonneville and the rural electrification program.
Yeah.
You changed this country that's still in place many years after your passing in the year 2000. And I would say that those were programs that led later to things such as Medicare and Medicaid, and our country will never be the same again. Would you just give us a brief reaction as you look at it in 2000 to what you laid in groundwork in relation to the government's relationship to the people and with these various programs.
Well, I am extraordinarily impressed with the foundation of great America. I am amazed that we've been able to become so prosperous. I do see certain dangers. Right now, I know from your newspapers that you are experiencing a time of unprecedented prosperity. The same situation occurred in my time. I say enjoy it. I say live with it and love it, but save your money. I say the same thing even in Social Security's instance. It was my intent to provide a program that would keep people from poverty, especially those who were no longer able to work, the aged, if they could remain out of poverty. That was the absolute goal of my program. I did not directly intend it to mean it to be a program of sole income. I think that in these times of prosperity, we really ought to save our money. It is not the American way for some reason, and the lesson of history should definitely teach this time that is the case. There will forever be an element of greed that will forever try to gain or to position itself greater than what it ought to, and there will most likely be a fallout. I don't know this. I hope that it won't change as I implemented through my administration. I never believed to be an end in itself, but a means to an end. And I always hoped that prosperity would be the thing that we found at that end and that we would move forward with. But as I view my programs now, as I view America at this day, I still say to you to save your money.
Thank you.
Yes.
Albert.
President Roosevelt, your wife Eleanor was admired and still is today admired by many other women and people throughout the world. Eleanor served a very useful purpose for you on many occasions, starting pre-presidency, actually, when you were running for governor of New York. What did you think of this, and what kind of partnership did you have?
Eleanor is, without a doubt, one of the most amazing women, one of the most amazing people I've ever known. She was my eyes and my ears. My great public works programs were in many ways hers. She then, when I was, of course, kept in the White House, would act for me entirely. She was extraordinarily insightful, very, very thorough. She would go to some great place that the National Recovery Act had set up, look at the menu of the food as an example, but not just examine the menu and what people were eating, but look in the pots to make sure things were matching up, to make sure every single thing was operating correctly. She was much more liberal than I was. I would say, I suppose I always said to Eleanor, she always told me what I should do, and I always told her what I could do. She knew exactly what to do. She was incredible in a number of ways. She was very caring. She was very in tune with civil rights. I was very in tune with the situation in Congress. We had many key legislators positioned in committees, in senior spots, where I could not take a position that would focus on civil rights, but Eleanor certainly could, and Eleanor would progress those causes that had never been known, say, in the 1930s or the 1940s. She's very influential in drafting the United Nations Charter. Incredible. She is truly wonderful.
Steve Sheen.
Mr. President, some people would say that you skillfully maneuvered a somewhat reluctant, maybe even isolationist America into the Second World War. Do you believe that's true? And if it was true, what were some of the biggest obstacles you faced?
Well, Churchill always wanted the great American people to serve as the arsenal of democracy. I agreed with him. I say, if your neighbor's house is on fire, would you not lend him your water hose to simply put it out, especially if it would prevent that fire from spreading to your own home? Certain roadblocks did lay in my way. I never wanted to involve our boys in another foreign war. However, when a dictator proves himself so adept at war, there comes a time when you can no longer promise peace, and you must simply promise to do your utmost to prevent war from being included on your shore. We were attacked. It was inconceivable to me at the time, and a simple fact. We were brought into this war by attack on American soil. However, yes, it's true, isolationists, Senator, I believe, Bora from Idaho, in fact, was one of my greatest adversaries in the isolationist cause, but I simply try to take very incremental steps, cash and carry, lend-lease, these sorts of things that I thought would preserve democracy. Any threat to democracy, wherever it is a threat to the American way of life. Our founding fathers, losing my mind in this thing, had the strong purpose of forming a way of life for the American people. In my time, as I viewed it, we had the strong responsibility of forming a way of life, but no longer for just America, but for all of mankind, that the world was becoming a much more integrated place, and as such was going to have to find a way to cooperate, to integrate itself, not to simply shut itself out. I mean, the great test of war is to find peace in the seedbeds of conflict that will naturally lie, and hopefully my great wife Eleanor and others will continue to use these great international peace organizations to form something to prevent us from ever having to decide again if we should fight in a foreign war.
If I may follow up, and I hope you will forgive me for saying so, Mr. President, but you look very youthful and healthy.
That's right.
For a man of your stature who did struggle with a serious disability, which was largely hidden from the American people. Was it an impediment to you? Did it hamper you in any way in carrying out the duties of your office?
Oh, no. I mean, the role of the president is to form for its nation that great place in history that it will form before the people themselves know they are forming it, to have a voice, to provide leadership. The use of my legs did not hamper me. Certainly, the chair of the president, regardless of the use of my legs, was beginning to wear on me, and I suffered from a number of illnesses there at closer to the end of my life. But 12 years of the administration, 12 years of dealing with Congress.
If I can follow up very quickly on that point, some people have suggested that you were gravely ill at the end of the war, at a time when very delicate negotiations were being conducted with the heads of state of the victorious powers, that maybe you gave up too much to Stalin, for instance, in part because you were so unwell. Was that true?
There were very delicate negotiations. I had to serve in many ways as a mediator between a colonial British Empire and a brand new Soviet Union. I wanted badly for Russia to be involved in the war against Japan. I wanted to see that front end very soon, and I wanted to see Japan crushed. I never really considered that Stalin would take any sort of different position. But like I said, it was not my intent to continue war or to hold possession of Europe. My intent was to simply free our good neighbors, to spread democracy, to win in our war front, and to send our boys home. My illness, I don't think, had anything to do with it, no.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Certainly.
In our time, something that has been very important in the latter part of the 20th century, as we move into the 21st century, deals with civil rights. It's somewhat confusing about exactly the role of the Roosevelt administration, but a number of scholars have indicated, Mr. President, that it is during your administration that we first had the very serious discussions that we would move into addressing this terrible problem we had with segregation. And your wife, the First Lady, who often has been described as the most effective and influential First Lady in the history of this country, upon your death later was very involved with such things as the United Nations Human Rights Charter. In fact, she chaired the committee. Yeah. And she spoke very much to this issue. And your successor, President Truman, integrated the military racially. What was your view, and was Mrs. Roosevelt more progressive in this area than you? And you certainly made some appointments to the court that would later be very supportive of civil rights.
Yes.
But we'd like to find out and have this opportunity to say, what did you feel that you could do? You had all these other fronts. You had the war, and you had the Depression and all.
Yes, I'm very happy that President Truman did have the opportunity to integrate armed services. My win forming the Army for the Second World War, my great purpose was to simply form an army, and not necessarily an integrated one that would work, one that could win. We held troop maneuvers and training exercises that were grossly inadequate to the storming blitzkrieg of Germany. Dealing with these issues at this time, I felt, was a bit premature. But my wife Eleanor, as you have said, did not. We had a situation where I was attempting to pass legislation and to win a war that was absolutely essential for the life of the nation. The details and the extraordinarily important roles that each race or that each sex would play in that society would come later in my mind. Unfortunately, I never got to address that. And perhaps fortunately for myself, I did have some things which I did something to advance civil rights. I held fundraisers at the White House to increase the funding for black schools, and I tried to integrate a number of things. However, compared to my wife Eleanor, it's really much more symbolic. Unheard of at the time, but much more symbolic than her great work.
Was there any time during your administration that Eleanor Roosevelt talked to you about moving faster in this area? Obviously, after your death, she became really one of the great spokespersons for the change. Did she encourage you more than you were willing to do with all the other tasks that you just described?
Yes, she did encourage me on a number of occasions. Some things, as you know, I considered, and so did my military advisors, our entire western coast to be subject, or at least eligible to be attacked by Japan. The crisis there was incredible, and it was very difficult for people to separate between what was Japanese and what was Japanese American. These individuals were placed into internment camps to simply try to fend off the attacks on either side. Eleanor, while she saw the merits and the good nature of such a proposal in some ways, only in the instance of a time of war, she believed that once the public was educated, that there is a difference between being Japanese and being a Japanese American, obviously, as in American could be anyone, any race, any creed, of course. But she was very vocal. She very much so wanted me to release the individuals in these internment camps before I did. Of course, they weren't harmed. I was still concerned about their harm. Eleanor was concerned about the harm that this would cause for history, that America did retain these individuals. That was one thing she was extraordinarily vocal about. Other things, obviously, the roles of some individuals in the military. But like I said, if I would have even come out, as she had also urged me on some anti-lynching measures in the South, I may have lost Southern votes. If I was trying to pass legislation I thought essential for the country, I may have entirely lost legislation. This was, to me, unthinkable, despite the ramifications. And I suppose that was just simply the harsh reality of my administration.
Certainly history has not been, and understandably so, has not been kind to you concerning the encampment that took place in Japanese Americans who had been born and lived here that had to go to camps. And much later, after your death, finally the government of the United States would recognize the problem and offer compensation. So even though you're known for the New Deal and you're known for helping save the country in World War II, it will be later administrations, including your wife's involvement, that will really address this area of what we call civil rights, and also to admit the mistakes. Would you react to that in that way?
Would I admit to what I did as a mistake? No. I would also say that this was not necessarily a time that human rights was taking the steps that it would in just a few short years. As I just said, the South, our black members of society in the South were concerned with lynching. This was their number one concern, no longer, as it would become in future generations, as civil rights is known today as being a time of segregation as to fight that, to fight the separation. At this time, they were, simply trying to combat through Congress violence. So civil rights was just starting to take shape. I thought it much more logical to save democracy itself before we were able to use the finer tools of democracy to do what it truly could do. Also, there are instances, even when the internment camps were dismantled and those individuals re-entered society, there are instances where I also believe that they should be dispersed, beyond the West Coast, to places where the memory of the war may not be quite as fresh as it would be on the West Coast in some ways. But we still had a number of problems. People who hired Japanese Americans to work on their farms and having signs posted outside, 1 mile to Little Tokyo, things like this. These sorts of things were situations that I tried to avoid. Yes, I suppose that as my wife would contend that it would be best not to avoid it and simply to immediately address it. But
we're very short on time, but
yes.
one of the crucial questions is, you had more than one vice president during these 4 elections, and certainly you dropped Vice President Wallace and you took Harry Truman. It was a crucial decision, not knowing that you were going to die soon, but it changed history. Could you briefly tell us why you chose Harry Truman?
Well, that is an interesting question, a question of choice. My time was a time when I was very responsive to my party. As I said, I was not a great party Democrat, however. 3.5 years out of every 4, I had a number of friends, and for 6 months I had a number of terrible enemies in both parties. Harry Truman was not so much my choice, but was the demands of my party. I had worked with Henry Wallace for a number of years. There was a number of problems with him in accordance to my party's wishes, but not to my own. I was a good friend of Henry. I enjoyed his company a great deal. He was a good liberal, a good thinker, and he was maybe a bit too kind, and that was maybe what did him in.
On that note, we have to bring our conclusion. President Franklin D. Roosevelt, thank you for being with us, and I want to quickly say to our audience, he's been played by Christopher Carlson, who is a legislative assistant to United States Senator Kent Conrad of North Dakota. Thank you for being with us today, and we've enjoyed very much the interview. Ladies and gentlemen, be with us again next week when we will continue our journey through America's 20th century. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
North Idaho College Public Forum is the longest-running public television show of its type in North America and is seen in 7 states and 2 Canadian provinces. Each episode is pre-recorded live and is an educational community outreach from North Idaho College. Please join us again at this same time next week for another new edition of North Idaho College Public Forum on this public television station.